I am delighted to be here with Martín Sánchez-Jankowski, who was the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. And Martín, your scholarly record really speaks for itself. Your work on inequality in such a wide range of countries, focusing on such topics as gangs, poverty, violence, schools, illicit underground economies, etc. Our focus today is really your 11 years as director of the Institute. But I wonder if you could give viewers who may not know you just some insights on your life, specifically what led you to sociology and to your involvement with ISSI.
Well, I have an odd name, so first of all I should probably give some explanation of this name. Two ethnicities, Sanchez and Jankowski. I was really Mexican, indigenous Mexican, but through a number of life's things, I became orphaned and was adopted out of an orphanage by the Jankowskis, and so that's how I got the name Jankowski. My father, who adopted me, and mother never went beyond grade 8 themselves, but my father was a union organizer and knew my family through having briefly met them, and so when the event came, I was adopted from there. So that's sort of the background of how I got my name. To cut to sort of the crux of your question, I was not trained in sociology at all. I'm in the sociology department, but I was trained as a political science and economist at MIT. I came to be in sociology because my work on gangs and inequality really fit them, and I've been happy in that department ever since. But I've always been trained as a researcher, and as somebody who was an empirical researcher. And I was always interested, because I went to MIT and had such a solid focus in it, on policy. So my own work has always been to use the kinds of research I've gained, primary research I gained, and to take it to the policy arena, and to have some level of policy involved in it. And my career has involved both of those things, so I've been a policy advisor much of my life to basically various government entities throughout, from school districts to mayors to the federal government, etc. I came to ISSI. There was no ISSI. I came at one time to the Survey Research Center, and the Survey Research Center, I believe, was the very first research institute on the campus. And it did not have institute in front of its name. It never did, but it was an institute, and it was the very first one. And it occupied the same building as the Institute for the Study of Social Change. And I was in the Survey Research Center partly because I had previously done survey research, quantitative research. But secondly, I had been given, because of an outside offer, I've been given this center for ethnographic research. And because it was a methods center rather than a substance center, they placed it in the Survey Research Center. So I remained there for many years. And then as the years went on, both the Survey Research Center and the Institute for the Study of Social Change, for not the same reason, but for various reasons, became, not for me saying this, but the university, the campus, decided they were financially in trouble, and that they needed to be actually sort of ended. But because there was great interest in each of them, they decided that the best choice of that is to maybe try to merge them. So my first introduction, really, to what becomes ISSI was to be asked by the Vice Chancellor for Research to just do one thing and one thing only, and that was to merge them into a new institute. And this new institute would be called, and they gave the name they wanted, the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, which they believed would actually would allow for both substantive reasons, methodological reasons, not only for that particular time, but also for any future development, the opportunity to develop without it being clumsy in terms of names. So my job was simply, as interim, was simply to merge them, and I did that. And after that was done, the directorship came up, and I applied for the directorship, and a number of other people did as well, and then I was given the directorship of this new institute, and then from there on, the effort was to rebuild things.
That's fascinating. So, tell me, why did you want to take on this job, and what were your goals? What did you want to accomplish?
Well, I wanted to take on this job to give something back to campus, really. I had been involved in my own research for a good part of my career. I wanted to actually see what could be developed in terms of various areas, and have various intellectual interests on the campus actually come together and form collectives that could interact with each other, both students and faculty, and even outside people who were themselves either in government or philanthropy, etc., to have an area in which they could discuss issues and to make contributions not only in what we know about the issue, whatever issue we were studying, but also taking that issue to inform the general public. So that was something that I really thought was important. And there I thought that what we should do is to actually have various interests. So my idea was to really promote and to design an institute that was an umbrella for various substantive issues, and then call those areas of those critical areas centers, and to actually encourage that in terms of primary research and also for teaching. So this was a time in which I thought the social laboratory, could be utilized actually to effectiveness. And in the building it's actually a primary site, it had enough space in which students and faculty could share. And I thought that would be an important area. And then I did have in mind certain areas, that at least to begin with, that I wanted to promote.
The Anna Head building, and what that was like to have this kind of research effort centered there.
Well, to start with, it's sort of interesting. You'd think a building that was not on the central campus would be something that would not be attractive, or not necessarily something that would be effective in terms of getting people to come over to it, both in terms of people going to colloquia or even scholars leaving their offices on campus and having an office off of campus, because it was technically off the campus. The building itself was a historical building, first, and that's the most important thing. It had started as an all-girls school from K through 12. It was called the Anna Head School. It was a school that, of course, was associated with people of wealth, because it was not inexpensive to send your child there. It was a dorm. That is, the students lived there as well as going to school there. So it was one of those older ideas about feminine even education at the time. You know, it had to be separated, etc. And so, but self-contained. it was a wonderful building because it was architecturally just of a different period. It was a 19th century architectural structure. It exuded that. It was built in 1890. We had wood shingles on the outside that were one redwood shingles, and on the inside just magnificent, actually fireplaces. But most importantly, it was large enough to accommodate an enormous number of people, both faculty and students, and that opportunity, I think, was something that I saw that could be actually utilized in terms of building communities. And when I say communities, there were two sets of communities I thought that was exciting. One was this very specific community that people had with each other about a substantive area, what they were doing, whether it was anthropology, sociology, political science, etc. And the other was this larger entity that was this umbrella called an Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. All of us together. And we purposely, when we had the space, the absolute space, to create actually students who were in different disciplines, and we did it on purpose. We put them together, not because they knew each other, but precisely because they didn't know each other, so they could share with each other what they brought from their specific disciplines. But all of that we were able to do because we had the space to do it. And what's really important is sometimes you have space and it's not used. In this particular case, it's wonderfully, I can report, we had the space, we offered the space, and it was used. And that part, I think, was really terribly important. It does speak to the importance of space, because without it, people take it for granted. Without it, it is difficult. And even now, these difficult times where we have Zoom, etc., it's different than physically bumping into somebody every day, and then all of a sudden you can have a discussion with them, and you can meet for coffee sometime or some other social event. But it gets you to share ideas and what you're doing and what's possible and all those things that make a nice community a community.
I would just like to add that having been one of those faculty members who had an office in that building, it made such a difference. Being part of the Berkeley Center for Social Medicine, we had people from all the way across the campus, from Stanford, from Davis, from UCSF, from all over. And people had offices there. They spent time there. Sometimes people had classes, again, which were multidisciplinary. And when we brought in also visiting scholars and visiting fellows, to be there with so much life and so much activity and so much communication across areas and departments made that an incredibly enriching experience. And I must say that now, once we sadly had to vacate that building as a result of a fire, I always shed a tear when I walked by it. So ISSI had a complex structure, both an overarching sort of organization, but that also brings together a diversity of individual research centers. How did you seek to foster the centers while at the same time building an institute as a whole and thinking about what it could offer members of the entire Berkeley community?
Well, the first thing was to think of substantive areas. And the first area that I looked at was the name of the previous institute, which was this Institute for the Study of Social Change, and the importance that it had. So in terms of historical things, I decided to start with it as a center. So I thought social change was always an issue, that one could see social change as just analyzing it. One could promote it. From one person could, I suppose, feel sad that there was social change. There's all those things going on, but there's lots of issues in social change. And I thought we'd start with that. And then we'd build other substantive areas. One of the areas that I thought really was important is, of course, is an area of health and the area of medicine. So that made it actually seem relatively easy. And I went and looked out at people who were doing anthropological work, because that dominated actually a lot on campus in terms of public health, although we do have a public health school, But I was looking for people who were doing really primary research on issues of health. So I reached out to various anthropologists and see if they were interested in building a center, and they already had an interest. They already had some group already within the anthropology department, and it made a nice transition over. And at the time, there was an anthropologist slash medical doctor named Seth Holmes, who was also doing important work, and I wanted to see if he was interested in actually getting other people together and forming a center. So I did that. I went around just like that and looked at different areas that I thought could be grouped under that. And then there was a person already on staff that was doing work on right-wing movements and had come with a grant in terms of right-wing movements. And I thought, I looked around the country, and I personally looked around and to see if there were any other campuses that were doing research on right-wing movements, basically from an academic standpoint. Whether you weren't promoting them, you weren't trying to actually police them, you were simply looking at them intellectually as important entities. And I found no one. There was actually no campus was doing it. And I thought, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to actually go forward. There's a person already working on it. And so I had the staff work with the campus and organizing this, getting the person who was on campus to make a formal center out of what had previously just been a research project. And so we did that. And then we went on, and then I brought actually the center that I was actually working on, the Center for, at the time it had been called Center for Urban Ethnography. And we had gotten a number of people who were just doing ethnographic research in that method together that were doing it in urban areas. But eventually I decided that was too confined, and that we wanted to promote people doing ethnographic research on any particular substantive area, whether it was urban or rural or even an institution or what have you. And so we changed the name, and that offered it up to people who were in urban planning, and people who were in political science, who were doing stuff in governments, and people who were in sociology, and people in anthropology. And I had in mind that you would not just do research, that you were bringing researchers, whether they were young researchers, people who were in graduate school now and training to be, the professoriate, or people in various policy areas together. And that was one of the ways that we would do it. And then additionally, there had been a previous center that I had been associated with called the Chicano Latino Policy Project, which began as a big grant from the state of California to do research on Latinos in the state, because they were such a large portion of the population, and very little was being done on it. And so we brought that also. It already existed, so it fit nicely under the umbrella of doing social issues. And then from there, I tried to extend out, and there was obviously no really research being done on issues having to do with Native Americans. And coming from that background myself, I thought this was something we'd do, and we would do it in areas that we thought were enormously important issues, probably most likely policy issues affecting tribal governments and tribal populations throughout actually the country. And so I got together with another person who on campus who was Native American himself and a prominent lawyer doing federal law, and we formed another center. So we never thought that this would be unending. What we thought was we would expand centers when one, we had the resources to do it, that we could garner the resources to do it, and also expand and facilitate actually research. So that's what I saw the Institute as doing, facilitating research and actually facilitating getting that research out to not only the public on the Berkeley campus, because there's a large campus and people do not know what everybody else is doing, making it available to them through colloquia, and other things that we put on the website. But in addition to that, to the general public, and we made a concerted effort to actually promote and to publicize events that we were sponsoring so that everybody had a chance. And I'm proud to say we were successful at that. People in the community, larger community, came and actually would listen to the colloquium and participate in it and ask questions about it. We made that very available to them. And we branched out. I thought one of the more important things that we did is that we saw ourselves as like a laboratory. We were part teaching as well. We were training as well. So we had not just colloquia, but we had workshops that involved people on campus as well as people off campus in which we trained.
Well, that occasions a question I'm really anxious to ask you. Could you tell us about how the Institute has sought to increase opportunities for training graduate students, particularly through the ISSI Fellow programs, and sometimes providing them with the kind of mentorship that, well, wasn't always necessarily as forthcoming within their own home departments?
Well, I think every student, comes with different skill sets. I mean, the one thing that any of us taught for a long time knows that is we're not really focused in on intelligence. We know most people are intelligent enough to actually be successful. What really issue for us that I think confronts us and challenges us is that people come with different skill sets. And it isn't that they can't do the work. The purpose is just to work towards building those skills that facilitate them to go on to do really more incredibly useful things. And one of the things that we set up was the Graduate Fellows Program, which in some levels I inherited from the director, the very important director of the Institute for the Study of Social Change, Troy Duster, who had set this up, had set part of it up through a grant he got. I think it was from the National Institute of Mental Health in terms of a training program. And what we took is that model, and that model we actually we proselytized on campus. And on campus we got a number of people who would come in and take it. A lot of them, though not all, and it's important to point that out, were minorities. Some were not minorities at all, and but were first generation, or if for various reasons, felt as though they needed a collective area where they actually felt comfortable enough to make a mistake. That is not always clear. People take that for granted. Not everybody feels comfortable enough to make a mistake. And one of the hardest things in doing teaching is to let people know that you don't really learn much from getting something right. You learn from getting something wrong. And that's very part of all of our lives. And that's something we should focus in on. You can't be afraid of making a mistake, because you make the mistake and you go on. And setting up an environment where everybody feels comfortable about that was really important for us. And we were able to do that and to really, I think, integrate what I just said into those groups where they worked individually, and we had wonderful staff. The important thing is that we had important, really wonderful staff who themselves were technically very expertise. I can't say enough for my assistant directors, Christine Trost, and Deborah Lustig, both of whom have PhDs. Christine and a PhD in political science from here, and Deborah with a PhD in anthropology from the University of Michigan. Both accomplished, both actually able to and continue to do research themselves, and able to actually to be leaders and coordinators of this particular event, this particular, I would say, program that we had, which has been enormously successful. People who have gone through this 2-year program, I'm proud to say, have gone on to go into professoriate, as well as in other areas of our society that have made enormous contributions. That part, I think, it just shows you not just what we did, but what can be done. And we never lost sight of what could be done, and to always try to improve on that. So I think having that as a formal program has been always important. It remains. and I hope it continues in the future. But but it's not the only ones. So many times, the non-formal programs were terribly important with students, where they could get together and they could talk and they could share their stuff, and they could ask questions. They could get help. I think the one thing that we always tried to do, and I tried to actually encourage, is that to seek out help and know that we would do our very best to provide it when it was asked.
That's great. Well, I can say that a number of my students have been ISSI graduate fellows, and it has made an enormous amount of difference. And I think of one, Hector Beltran, who then went on to become a faculty member at your alma mater at MIT, but in anthropology.
That's right, yeah.
So as the founding director of the Joseph A. Meyer Center for Research on Native American Issues, could you please tell us about the center, about its founding, and about the role it's played in supporting research on Native Americans at Berkeley?
Yes, I mean, there is, as most people in the United States, should know, but they may not always know, that there are various treaties and various associations of Native Americans throughout the history to our society. And many of the Native Americans in this country live on reservations and are really run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And one of the things that most people don't know is there's a very large, there's a very large section of law that's devoted primarily to Native Americans, federal Native American law, and it has to do with treaties and other things that they have a special relationship with. So what I wanted to set up is a research center that actually dealt with issues or problems that were faced by various tribes in the United States, that we could provide research for them. Because one of the things that they do not have access to is a lot of research. Because of their special relationship, they don't actually have, and they're not as integrated, they're much more segregated than one would imagine, and in that particular way they were much more vulnerable to the kinds of information that they need to make decisions for themselves, as well as federal government employees or anybody else, or state employees who have to interact with them. So we decided, Joe Myers, who was, as I indicated, a person who was already taught federal Indian law at the UC Berkeley Law School, and actually ran a center on Indian law out of Santa Rosa, north, and that actually provided expertise in terms of law to various tribes throughout the country. We decided together that what we would do is we'd set up a research center that actually looked at and take grants that actually looked at issues that were faced by various tribes. And we did, and we could go through each one of them. One had to do with, of course, issues having to do with accidents that happen on federal reservations, who's responsible for them. We had done stuff on economic development, actually in terms of their colleges. There are tribal colleges that don't have access to all the information that's actually out there. So between myself and some other people who are economic oriented, we set up courses that would be available to tribal colleges on economic development and training. When we did some, so that area we went out and we provided getting scholarships for Native American students in terms of allowing them to have access to the kind of financial resources they need in order to finish their degrees, because that was one issue, the small number that actually have degrees. And then we did some other things that I thought were really important. One of the most important things that we did these technical things, and we could go through each and every one of them, but I think it's less important than to look at one of the things that we did. There are lots of artifacts that are related to tribes and they have access to a lot of these things themselves. That is, they also have a lot that is they should have repatriated to them, and some of that is going back to them. But they have a lot themselves, and the real question was there was a real need for helping museums, the specific museums of each of these tribes, to actually take the objects they had, protect them, and also place them in places where people could observe them presenting them. And we run actually a workshop in the summer where people from Native Americans from different tribes come, who are in charge of their tribal's museum, come to actually get trained in various ways of safekeeping the objects they have and also presenting them. And that's been a tremendous success, and we've had actually gone out to garner money for that. I can't say enough about that in terms of, I can't say enough about that in terms of basically what they have reported back to us, how meaningful it's been actually to them, because they've learned technical sort of stuff. It wasn't just an experience, it was actually technical skills that they were able to use to actually support the kinds of cultural things that were going on. We also provided language. We provided workshops on languages. Mm-hmm. We had that where people could take various indigenous languages as efforts to revamp them or revitalize them. And I was, we're very proud. We did this. We considered the Americas not just the United States, but also Canada and Mexico. We offered a huge language course in Nawa, which is of course was attended and by what was really important, and we had money to do it from the outside. We had not only people who were scholars wanting to learn Nawa, but we had community people from Oakland wanting to do that, and it was an enormous success. And it showed that the university could be both a good partner to actually, in my judgment, to the community, the Bay Area. So I think that, and it has continued on. So we bring scholars in. We have students who come here. We've got, as I said, for scholarships, and we brought students in here, and we've actually done training programs, as well as just plain clothes. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. One final question, in a kind of personal register. What difference do you think the Institute has made to your career and to your time here at Berkeley?
Well, that's a good question. I think that as I'm near the end of my my career here, I'd say to you, it's been a really important part. What's the building part? That it's not focused on you so much as me, as the ability to actually give something. And in return, you really do learn that you get something, and I think that's been terribly important to me. All the new people I've met, bringing people together, interesting them in other researchers, stimulating their own research in particular kinds of ways, is really rewarding. I think is what the Academy is all about. It's what makes it special. That's what I have always found actually is something sacred about the Academy, and that is that you have differences of opinion, and those differences are great, and they're not only great in terms of the differences between you and someone else is great, but the differences that are great actually makes both the people who have these differences better. They have to think about what's challenged to them. It's all how we improve. And it's just a simple thing. For me, just the ability to actually help that go on is all really is the contribution towards having that go on was what made it important for me in that regard, because I've met scholars that I would never have met before. I've friends with students who were in different disciplines who I never would ever have met before. And it's an institute like that brings people from disparate areas together, which, and creates not just a community, but creates things that don't stop. People, you go through life and they're still there for you. They remember you, you remember them. And that part, I think, for me will be is good for memories. Memories are good, and when you get my age, memories are really good. So I'm happy about that.
That's good.
Okay, one of the things that I think is really important about the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, that I think is different than if you had another institute that did stuff in terms of having laboratories. And I mean like something like a chemistry place or somebody doing the physical sciences, is the ability to bring in people who were not formally in the university into actually the university climate. And what that mattered. And there were varieties of people. We've had people who were medical doctors from Venezuela. We've had people who were actually doing policy work from India. We've had people who came from Bangladesh who've come in, and they weren't really formally a part of the university, but they were doing research that had been funded, and we brought them in for various pieces of time, and actually they interacted, and the kinds of research that they did and the kinds of interactions they had were terribly important, not only for their time here or the people who interacted with them, but for time after they left the Institute, where they were actually a linked resource for each other. Mm-hmm. I think having an institute like that does that, is able to do that, and facilitates this, is terribly important for broadening community as we understand it. Not simply on this campus, not simply in this area, not simply in the state, but internationally, nationally and internationally, because those linkages are actually terribly important. And those when you've met somebody and create a relationship, they don't end. They stay there. They actually become something it grows on both individuals, and it has the potential for them to be terribly useful for each and for the society in general. I think one of the things that is missed by most people is that they think of an institute as only bringing together people simply that are already on this campus, and it's just not that. ISSI was just not that. And I think that becomes very important to say institutes like that are really necessary for a healthier academic and society, as well as broadly speaking society.
So Martín, thank you so much. I mean, your friendship and the time when you together at ISSI over the years have been wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing with people who'll be looking at this video to know what a difference ISSI makes to you, to Berkeley, and far beyond.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure.